But most important, I think, have been the way in which a number of feminist scholars have tried to offer new perspectives in the way in which we look at the relationship between gender and historiography. They have provided a much more complex view of this relationship. They have shown how women were sites on which a tradition was debated. Law, for example, has emerged as a very significant arena for gender studies, where they have argued that various laws, they show it was like a double-edged sword. There were some gains, of course, made, but there were also sometimes, two steps backwards that were taken. So, for example, scholars show how widow remarriage came about. Of course, very important. It brought about a law by which widows could remarry. But then works of some scholars shows that actually some of the lower caste women actually lost out because of this law. Initially, they used to get some property in their earlier husbands. From her earlier husband, but after the Widow Remarriage Act came, she actually sometimes lost out. So, in some ways, what feminist scholars say is that most debates, they don't give a complex agency to women, and the way in which traditional histories have been written, and also there has been this argument that large amount of history has been Hindu-centric. So there has been a lot of emphasis on Hindu social reforms, on Hindu women, and in some ways Muslim women have been rendered marginal or invisibilized to some extent. Also, for example, the new work that has emerged on looking at the question of women from a Dalit lens, brings in new questions which have hitherto been ignored. Or, for example, new histories on tribal women, on Dalit women, on their perspectives that are emerging, which are providing a new kind of richness to the way in which we look at histories of modern India. But what is most interesting, I think, is that while feminist historians point out to limitations of social reforms, they point out to the limitations of the nationalist movement, they also point out to the way in which new possibilities were created. Unintentionally, the reformers may not have wanted it, the nationalists may not have wanted it, but there were new kinds of opportunities that came about for women in this period. There were new kinds of potentials, that emerged in this period. A lot of pioneering women emerged in this period, which needs to be taken into account, who questioned orthodoxies and conservatisms. And so women should not be seen as a homogeneous category. There were, you have to take into account differences of caste, class, religion. And so while we need to talk about the limitations, we also need to show how women carved new spaces for themselves in this period, both in private and public domains. And after all, in spite of various limitations, this was a period when caste hierarchies were interrogated, or at least qualified to some extent. Reforms and nationalism signaled new opportunities for women, however limiting they proved to be. There was a growing awareness of women's rights, and increasing articulation in the public political sphere. So often, some of these reforms actually, maybe unintentionally, paved way for some great and major changes. And actually this increased patriarchal insecurities. The gender demarcation of spaces was really becoming untenable at this time. And so the very same vocabulary that was first deployed to control women acquired its own dynamic in print, education, literature, law, marriage, etc. So after this, very quickly, I want to go through some of the examples from my own work to show how, this kind of, till now I've talked about broad historiography and its trends, but let me now move to some examples, of, this kind of paradox, which show the paradoxical gendered legacies of modern Indian historiography. And so, which show that how patriarchies were, recast in more powerful ways, but also they were subverted or at least questioned in this period. And gender historiography also tells us, how to use our archives innovatively. So, what is a very important contribution of gender historiography has been that it has expanded our archival arenas. जो हमारे अभिलेखागार हैं, उनका विस्तार किया है. हम अब उस तरह के स्रोतों को एक जेंडर्ड इतिहास लिखने के लिए प्रयोग में लाते हैं जिसको हम पहले नहीं देखते थे. तो केवल ऑफिशियल आर्काइव्स काफी नहीं है, हमें उससे आगे जाने की जरूरत है. तो पहला एग्जाम्पल जो मैं ले रही हूँ अपने काम से वो है कि रिमूवल ऑफ पर्दा को लेकर और जो घूंघट को लेकर जिस तरह के विवाद औपनिवेशिक काल में उभर रहे थे. एंड मोस्ट ऑफ माय एग्जाम्पल्स कम फ्रॉम नॉर्थ इंडिया बिकॉज दैट इज द एरिया वेयर आई हैव वर्कड. So if we examine the debates around the removal of Purdah, what we see is that the Hindu reformers were actually moving on a pendulum. So while they were opposing Purdah in no unclear terms, they were also supporting it selectively as a celebration of lajja or modesty, looking at it as the Hindu woman's best adornment. So, with greater access of women to public spaces, for example, the coming of railways, women were traveling sometimes alone, class divisions were breaking down, women were participating much more in the public sphere now. So, with this greater access of women in public places, there were great anxieties among the male Hindu reformers, and so selective appearance of Purdah was thought to be necessary in public spaces like railway stations, public ghats, roads, in interactions with outside shopkeepers and with other men. So, for example, if you look, this quote is from a women's journal of the time called Stri Darpan, which is, talking about how, women tend to construct completely opposite meanings of Purdah. So you can see on your screen the Hindi quote, and basically what it is saying is that, how women, they observe Purdah at home, but in the public sphere they leave their faces uncovered, and it expresses disgust at public displays by women, and it basically upholds that the true Purdah was what existed between Sita and Lakshman. In this period, cartoons appeared, at this time, which again critiqued Purdah and at home, and then what prevailed outside. So this, shows women taking bath, in public ghats. And so these kind of arguments, these kind of images, they betrayed anxieties about women's behavior, movement, and relationships outside the household. Women bathing semi-nude in public ghats were seen as a sign of shame, of being uncivilized, and a licensed misdoing in an open space. So this was an antithesis of Purdah. So to take another example, where women were urged to observe Purdah at railway stations to escape the lustful eyes of railway staff, passengers, and porters. And so again, this anxiety about women in the public sphere is reflected through this debate. So, just a very brief example. Through this very brief example, I've tried to show how the discourse on Purdah reveals an ambiguity, leading to simultaneous condemnation and endorsement, as reformers were at times afraid of the subversive potential of completely doing away with Purdah. It paralleled other attempts to control and isolate women, and at the same time to support reforms in order to appear civilized. So let me move to another example from my work, which is the example of women's education, which appeared high on the agenda of both missionaries and reformers. अगर हम प्री कॉलोनियल इंडिया की बात करते हैं तो हम देखते हैं कि स्त्री शिक्षा बहुत कम थी. ये काफी बड़ी लोगों में मान्यता थी कि अगर स्त्री को ज्यादा पढ़ाएंगे तो वो बहुत जल्दी विधवा हो जाएगी. तो इस प्रकार से हम देखते हैं कि literacy rates were extremely low for women in pre-colonial India, and largely initially it was the Britishers and the missionaries who began efforts to change this, especially from the early 19th century. Slowly, reformist groups like Brahmo Samaj, Prarthana Samaj, Arya Samaj, Theosophical Society, they also adopted this campaign for women's education and assigned a native heir and gave a credibility to this cause of women's education. Indian reformers really started talking about women's education. But we need to see the kind of language that is being adopted for women's education. So what we see is that the education at this time for women is not linked to employment. It is not linked to, that women will go out and work. Education is basically being geared to make women better wives and mothers. So both for Hindu and Muslim women. So for example, Gail Mino's very interesting work on Muslim reformers, or of the first generation, like Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, Nazir Ahmad, Altaf Hussain Hali. They were basically arguing that Sharif Muslim women should be educated within their homes, and even if they receive education in schools, it should be to make them better companions and mothers. What I'm trying to say is that particularly in 19th century, education for women was highly controlled by male perspectives. Maulana Ashraf Ali Khanvi wrote this book called Behishti Zevar in 1905, through which he attempted a thoroughgoing Islamicization of Muslim women. और कहा जाता था कि बेहिश्ती जेवर की एक कॉपी हर शरीफ मुस्लिम वुमन को उसकी सुहागरात पर दी जानी चाहिए, ताकि वो एक बेहतर पत्नी और एक बेहतर माँ जो है वो बन सके. So what I'm trying to say is that education for women was linked to religious lines. Even among Hindu reformers, education was, कि रामायण महाभारत पढ़नी चाहिए उनको, but और किसी प्रकार की जो education है वो उनको नहीं देनी चाहिए. There were also these great fears about, what educating women, too much education, what will that do for women. So, these kind of quotes you get that we want women to be educated, but, if it leads to deterioration in morals, then we prefer our honor to the education of our women. So there are these kinds of fears also that are being expressed simultaneously about what women's education will do. So, for example, Annie Besant, one of the leading female reformers of that time, is, also declared that, while man's education is for outside and public employment, women's education is to make them good wives and mothers, to make them skilled nurses, घर की वैद बनाना है उनको, etc. So there is a particular kind of education that women should be given. Even if you look at cartoons of that time, which were published in reformist Hindi magazines, for example, what you see is they were underlining the kind of effects of Western education on men, and so how men are completely drained because of education, and the other side, the cartoon is about this kind of private public sphere demarcation that I was talking to you about, about how the man is a king at home, but when he moves outside, he's like a babu. So women had to be kept away from this kind of an education. That's how the argument went. There was a whole series of, there was this very famous magazine of early 20th century called CHARU, one of the leading Hindi magazines of early 20th century, and there were a series of cartoons published, in it around that time, which talked about this, this link between women and education, and which expressed fears of women getting too much educated. So I love this cartoon. It is this, this husband serving tea to his wife, which is very, I think, why not? I mean, this should be the way. Sometimes, so many women have served tea to their husbands. So if a husband serves, what's the problem? But again, there is this kind of, this cartoon expresses this anxiety, about women getting too much educated. It makes fun of wives, at wives who get, their husbands to make tea, and signals it as a sign of disaster. Okay, पति को चाय लाने में 5 मिनट की देरी हो गई तो वो अपने पति पर बहुत बिगड़ रही है. Or look at this cartoon, which continued in the same vein, stating that the wife is writing this terrific note on the present state of women, and this godlike husband is looking after the child outside. Whoever laughs on seeing this natural scene, may God give him such a firebrand wife. So these kind of cartoons were also published, which reveal the anxieties, around women's education. Or, for example, look at these kind of poems that were being published, at this time. So, again, there is this, fear of there is a caricature of the modern Western woman that is being built at this time. So, there is this supposed letter from a civilized wife that I learned dancing and singing along with it. Now I will watch and show and learn and teach. I will be a beautiful butterfly flying away over flowers. I will go to the theatre and will bring sparks and flowers. So again, a caricaturing of the modern Western women. Or I have learnt English, I will not remain under the veil, I will go to play the ball, I will flirt with men, husbands should be young and English and can be Christian or Muslim. मैं अंग्रेजी पढ़ गई, नहीं पर्दे में रहने की, गेम खेलने को जाऊंगी, मर्दों में जी बहलाऊंगी, पति अंग्रेजी दा जवान हो, Christian या मुसलमान हो. So again, anxiety is about conversions, about interreligious marriages. These are also implicitly getting linked to issues of education, of educating women too much in this period. There were these series of cartoons, published at this time, again caricaturing the modern woman and the everyday routine of the modern woman. So she takes bath at 7 a.m. She decorates her hair at 8 a.m. They were published in Chand in January 1938. She does her makeup at 9 a.m., goes to college at 10 a.m. And just look at the cartoons and you can see them as I'm going through the slideshow. She drives, goes out for a drive at 5 p.m. She listens to the radio at 8 p.m. So all the modern technologies are also being associated with the modern woman. She reads novel at 12 night. So where does she have the time to do household work? And just look, the charkha is displayed as a symbol of this household work. So what we see in this period is a large amount of didactic literature, which is teaching women basic household management, domestic sciences, home nursing, cooking, sewing, moral education. Again, this prescriptive literature, is saying that, our basically our home is our school. So this quote is by this a male reformist writer. A lot of didactic literature actually published in Hindi at this time. So this quote is from one such literature, which is saying that our home is our school and the mistress of the house is established there like a Saraswati. So home is a temple in which various religious duties are performed. Home is like a small state whose ruler is the woman and the subject are her children. So again, what you see is the main purpose of education is to increase morality. It is not linked to employment. It is not linked to any other kind of work. To take another example, the purpose of education in this quote, says is not to make one literate, but to make one worthy. So education does not mean that our sisters acquire degrees of BA and MA and indulge in fun, luxury and entertainment. The real purpose of our female education is sacrifice, endurance and self-elevation. त्याग, बलिदान और आत्मोत्सर्ग, ये शिक्षा का मुख्य ध्येय है. So what I'm trying to say is that education for women was a moral imperative and a national investment designed to domesticate the woman and assign her more enlightenment role for greater compatibility in marriage. Even women reformers could not escape such views completely. So, with the significant exception of Pandita Ramabai, reformers such as Mataji Tapaswini, Annie Besant, etc., they also advocated schools which trained women in modern domesticity rather than equal education. It was not intended to be conducive to employment, but rather envisaged as an instrument of self-improvement. So nowhere was education given such a moral fervor, a pure character, and a virtuous flavor as in the case of women's education. However, I do not want to end my lecture on this note, because till now I have been talking only of the limits of the educational avenues of women and the function of education in the subordination of women. A study of education for women, I think, would be incomplete without, drawing attention to levels other than that of the formal script. So many elite women, Muslim women, for example, like Azizun Nisa, Begums of Bhopal, V. Aman, V. Ashraf of North India, they educated themselves against all odds. Tanika Sarkar talks of this Bengali housewife, Rashashundari Devi, an upper caste Bengali woman who taught herself to read and write amidst greatest secrecy. She chronicled for the first time the life of a Hindu housewife and wrote the first recorded autobiography printed in the Bengali language by an Indian woman called Amar Jeevan in 1876. Some upper caste widows of Banaras, as Nita Kumar shows, they used education to reject stereotypes of widows and to manipulate the ascetic model to carve out a space for themselves. As education blossomed, many middle-class women used it to participate and become visible in the public realm, such as publishing in magazines, in journals, singing songs at literary and political functions, and even when cast in a reformist mold and accepting some of the structures of male reformers, women's journals created endless opportunities for women to argue for a voice of their own in family and educational life. Letters written by women, which Francesca Orsini talks about, for example, in various women's magazines, stressed their right to feel and allowed a space for solidarity in a covert and tentative way. So in spite of various limitations, there emerged a number of dynamic women like Pandita Ramabai, Begum Rokia Hussain, who benefited from the spread of women's education in this period. They flowered as editors and educators. These women were deciding for themselves what they wanted. Begum Rokia Hussain wrote a biting satire on patriarchy and its sanctity through religious practices. Hemabati Sen, who was widowed at 10, flouted social conventions and became one of the earliest women doctors. And above all, one of the greatest inspirations of this period was Pandita Ramabai, whose period is from 1858 to 1922, who was from Maharashtra. She was a remarkable woman of her times. She was Brahmin by birth. She first created a stir in 1880 by marrying out of caste to a Bengali Shudra. She became a widow at an early stage and was shunned by her community. Shortly afterwards, she converted to Christianity. At this time, she was determined to learn English and medicine. She traveled to England to do so. She wrote the book The High Caste Hindu Woman as part of an effort to raise funds. The book, which was geared towards sympathetic Westerners, gave an inside view of the wretched condition and second-class status given to high caste Hindu women. It was an angry account of the harms of upper caste Hindu society. She blamed Manu, the Hindu progenitor of man, for the current societal wrongs against women. So Ramabai was one of the most radical 19th century figures. She was a pioneer in women's education and a rebel champion of women's rights. So we see a kind of proto-feminism and a language of rights being expressed in the print public sphere of this time. Even the reading habits of women in this period point to different directions. So while you could frame and limit the syllabus, you could order prescriptive texts. Once women were educated, it was difficult to control what they were reading and the uses to which they were putting their knowledge. In fact, they were reading everything. So I came across this very interesting quote, actually by a woman reformer, where she's saying that, if you look at these trunks of these, educated women, they are full of these juicy novels, and they are reading not just the books of Niti Shastra and Dharm Shastra, they are actually reading spicy novels. They are also reading all kinds of books. So women, were really not just reading didactic literature or what they were asked to read, but once they could read, they would, reading is a very private act. And so, it can have subversive potentials. Women were reading all kinds of stuff, and that also needs to be taken into account. So, print and education basically revolutionized reading habits and possibilities and penetrated into all sorts of times and spaces within everyday life by its sheer portability. So thus, while education may have been intended to reinforce the power of the male over the female, it also empowered its female beneficiaries in ways unanticipated by the reforming patriarchs. It created unpredictable but undeniable opportunities for some women. So I'm going to conclude my lecture, now. And you are please free to ask me any questions. I'll try to answer them, or you can write to me. I think it's difficult in Facebook to have an interactive session. So just to conclude, there are many arenas where gendered perspectives can provide us with more nuanced and layered understandings of histories. Gendered histories teach us to be innovative with our resources. They really, as I said, they make us expand our archival arenas. They compel us to include, indeed center, materials that are often erased or elided in archival research. Pointing to erasures and silences in the archives and historical accounts, gendered histories teach us to read between the lines by including archives of emotion, of memory as testimony, and creatively using other archives. Moreover, they not only discuss cataclysmic events from our pages of history, but also focus on the mundane, the anecdotal, and the everyday. They are as much about intimate spaces as they are about open ones, messing up their distinctions. They talk of gender not just as an autonomous entity, but as deeply intermeshed with caste, class, and religious identities. They probe femininities and masculinities. They interrogate the state and the community, where British and Indian patriarchal forces colluded with each other. In them, both the colonizers and the colonized emerge as actors and initiators. They not only tell us how patriarchies found new expressions and language in colonial India, but also how they were constantly challenged and interrogated. They inspire us to come to terms with difference and conflict and live with such differences. Gendered histories highlight the ambiguities and tensions of simultaneous operations of patriarchal norms and constant resistances of conservative dominations and assertions of freedom and sharing that constantly subvert hierarchies, offering us arenas of potential possibilities for imagining our present and our future. Thank you so much for listening to me.